March 7th, 1945. Near the Ludendorff Bridge, Remagen, Germany. The air vibrates before the sound arrives. A dull concussion rolls through the valley, then another. American artillery walking forward with mechanical patience. Gefreiter Karl Müller, infantryman, 277th Volksgrenadier Division, presses his back into the damp earth of a shell scrape, carved hurriedly into the slope above the Rhine. His helmet rattles with each impact. Dirt trickles down his collar. Somewhere to his left, a man is praying. Somewhere to his right, another is laughing. Not from humor, but from exhaustion pushed too far. The bridge still stands. Black smoke coils upward from its steel arches, but it stands. Defiant. Impossible. The Americans have crossed. Everyone knows it now. Orders crackle down the line, then contradict each other, then stop entirely. Field telephones lie dead. Runners don't return. Müller risks a glance over the embankment. Through drifting smoke, he sees them. US infantry moving with unsettling calm. Olive-drab uniforms, white stars painted on helmets, rifles held low but ready. Behind them, tanks idle, engines humming steadily, as if they have all the time in the world. A voice cuts through the chaos. Hände hoch, Waffen weg. Hands up. Drop your weapons. The words are not shouted in anger. They are precise, practiced. Müller hesitates for half a second longer than he should. Training screams at him to resist. Propaganda whispers that capture means starvation, revenge, humiliation. But his body betrays ideology. His fingers loosen. The rifle slides into the mud. All along the slope, men rise slowly, hands raised, eyes hollow. Some look relieved. Others look ashamed. None look surprised. The war has already passed them by. They are herded together at gunpoint, not violently but firmly, boots splashing through churned earth, toward a temporary enclosure strung with barbed wire and marked with white signs reading PW, prisoner of war. The Americans search them efficiently. No shouting, no blows. Watches are taken, letters confiscated and placed into numbered envelopes. An American sergeant checks Müller's dog tags, mispronounces his name, shrugs, and writes it down anyway. By nightfall, trucks arrive. The ride west is cold. Canvas flaps snap in the wind. Müller sits on a wooden bench between strangers who smell of sweat, cordite, and resignation. No one speaks. They pass burned-out villages, wrecked half-tracks, abandoned guns pointing uselessly at the sky. At a rail yard the next morning, they are transferred again. Boxcars, chalk markings, more counting, more forms. Everything the Americans do seems governed by paper. Inside the rail car, time stretches. Someone whispers rumors. Texas, California, Canada, Africa. No one knows where they are going. Only that it is far. Days later, the doors slide open. Sunlight floods in, blinding after the darkness. The air is warm. The buildings are intact. Signs are written in English. A guard with a broad accent shouts instructions Müller barely understands. You're in the United States now. Follow orders, and there'll be no trouble. The words feel unreal. America has been a concept. Factories in propaganda films, caricatures on posters, distant voices over shortwave radio. Now it is asphalt under his boots, and an endless sky overhead. The camp they are taken to is nothing like what Müller imagined. Wooden barracks arranged in neat rows, proper latrines, a mess hall that smells of actual food, guards who rotate shifts like factory workers. There is no urgency here, no sense of siege. On the first evening, Müller receives his meal. White bread, meat, coffee, real coffee. He eats slowly, suspicious, waiting for the catch. None comes. Weeks pass. The prisoners are put to work. Farm labor, road maintenance, kitchen duty. Always supervised. Always within the rules. They are paid small wages in camp scrip, enough to buy toiletries or cigarettes from the canteen. It feels absurd to be paid by the enemy. What unsettles Müller most is not the treatment. It is the calm. America is not fighting for survival here. It is fighting elsewhere, across oceans, while life at home continues. One morning in early April, Muller's name is called again. He lines up with 9 others. No explanation is given. They board a truck under light guard and roll out of the camp. The road is paved. Cars pass them, sleek, polished, numerous. Houses line the streets, unbroken by shell fire. Children ride bicycles. Women carry shopping bags. The truck slows, stops. Before Muller stands a low, wide building with glass walls stretching from end to end. Bright lights glow inside. People move freely, unhurried. Metal carts roll smoothly across polished floors. Above the entrance, a single word he recognizes instantly. Supermarket. The doors slide open with a soft, mechanical hiss. Cold air spills out, carrying a scent Muller hasn't known in years. Fresh food. In that moment, standing in a defeated uniform, helmet in his hands, Karl Muller does not yet understand what he is about to lose. But he is about to understand what Germany never had. The first thing Muller hears is the hum. Not engines, not artillery. A low, constant electrical vibration. Refrigeration units embedded into the walls, running endlessly, without pause or ration. It is a sound no German city has known for years. The prisoners step inside together, boots echoing softly on polished concrete. The light is almost shocking. Bright, even, shadowless. Overhead fixtures glow without flicker, as if electricity itself is abundant and unremarkable. Muller blinks, his eyes adjusting. The aisle stretches out before him like a corridor in a factory, long, straight, and impossibly full. Shelves rise higher than his shoulders, stacked edge to edge with canned goods, labels in bold colors, reds, yellows, blues, each can identical to the next, as if stamped out by machines that never stop. Corn, beans, peaches, meat, so much meat. He walks slowly, afraid that if he moves too quickly, the scene will dissolve, revealed as some cruel illusion or psychological trick. In Germany, a single can like this might be traded for favors, saved for holidays, hoarded like treasure. Here, they are stacked 10 deep. Behind him, Unteroffizier Franz Weber exhales sharply. Das ist unmöglich, he mutters. This is impossible. A woman passes them, pushing a metal cart with a child perched inside. The cart is half full, milk bottles clinking softly, bread loaves piled carelessly, fruit rolling loose in a corner. She smiles politely at the prisoners and continues on, as if a group of enemy soldiers in faded field grey uniforms is merely an inconvenience in the aisle. No one stares, no one whispers. They are invisible. Muller reaches the end of the aisle and turns into another. And another. Sugar. White. Clean. Packed in heavy paper sacks. Flour. Coffee in quantities that make his stomach tighten. He remembers his mother scraping grounds from used filters, boiling them twice, trying to coax flavor from nothing. At the produce section, water sprays gently over rows of vegetables to keep them fresh. The droplets glisten under the lights. Oranges sit in pyramids, their skins unblemished. Muller has not seen an orange since 1939. One of the prisoners reaches out instinctively, fingertips brushing the surface of an apple. Don't touch, a guard says, not sharply, not angrily. Just a rule, stated plainly. The prisoner pulls his hand back, embarrassed, as if caught doing something shameful. At the meat counter, the group stops entirely. Behind thick glass lie slabs of beef, pork, chicken, whole birds, not divided into rationed portions. A butcher in a white apron chats casually with a customer, knife flashing as he works. He looks well fed, strong, unworried. Muller feels a pressure in his chest that has nothing to do with hunger. This is not emergency stock. This is normal. A guard notices their stunned silence. There's more in the back, he says casually, adjusting the strap of his rifle. This is just what's on display. The words hit harder than any insult. In the back. As if what Muller sees is merely a fraction of something even larger, hidden from view, because it doesn't need to be shown. They move on toward the checkout counters. Registers ring softly. Paper bags fill quickly. No ration cards are inspected. No stamps punched. Money changes hands with bored efficiency. Mueller watches a man purchase more food than his family would receive in a month. Without hesitation, without calculation. He does not look relieved. He does not look grateful. He looks normal. A cashier glances up and notices Mueller staring. For a moment, her expression tightens, not with fear, but with uncertainty. Then she smiles, reaches beneath the counter, and produces a small paper cup. She fills it with ice. Ice. Pours a dark liquid over it. The cubes crack softly. She slides it toward Mueller. The guard sees the exchange, pauses, then nods. Go ahead, he says. Mueller lifts the cup carefully, as if it might vanish. His fingers ache from the cold. He takes a sip. The sweetness is overwhelming. The cold shocks his teeth. His eyes burn, not from emotion alone, but from the unfamiliar sensation of ice against his tongue. Around him, no one speaks. Not Weber, not the guards, not the shoppers. In that moment, something fundamental collapses. This country is not enduring war. It is sustaining it. The truck ride back to camp is silent. No one speaks of escape. No one jokes. The images replay endlessly. The shelves, the lights, the calm faces of civilians untouched by bombing or hunger. That night, Mueller lies awake on his bunk. The barracks are quiet. Outside, a generator hums steadily, providing light through the darkness. He realizes that for the first time since the war began, he's not afraid, because fear belongs to those who lack. And America lacks nothing. The camp settles back into routine, but the routine no longer feels the same. Karl Mueller notices it first in small ways. Men eat more slowly now, as if savoring even the ordinary camp meals. Conversations that once revolved around units, medals, and rumors of counterattacks drift instead toward comparisons. Quiet, almost guilty comparisons. How many loaves did you see? Did you notice the refrigerators? They had fruit in April. These are not complaints. They are observations. Careful, measured, as though speaking too loudly might invite disbelief. 2 weeks after the supermarket visit, Mueller is assigned kitchen duty again. Steam rises from vats of potatoes. Trays clatter. The smell of soap and cooked meat hangs in the air. An American officer enters with a clipboard, older than most, glasses perched low on his nose, his uniform pressed but worn. He does not shout. He does not bark orders. He introduces himself simply as Captain Howard Ellis, U.S. Army. This isn't an interrogation, he says, his German accented but clear. We're conducting evaluations. The word makes Mueller uneasy. A small group of prisoners is selected, men from different units, different regions. They are escorted to a wooden building set apart from the barracks. Inside are chairs, desks, and filing cabinets stacked with folders. On the wall hangs a large map of the United States. Pins marking camps scattered across dozens of states. Ellis gestures for Mueller to sit. He begins with simple questions. Name, rank, place of capture. Nothing threatening, nothing accusatory. Then, gradually, the focus shifts. What surprised you most about America? Mueller hesitates. The correct answer drilled into him for years would be decadence, weakness, excess leading to moral decay. Instead, he hears himself say, how organized it is. Ellis looks up, interested. Explain. The food, Mueller continues carefully, it isn't stored like a reserve. It is flowing, always moving. Ellis writes something down. His pen scratches steadily. And how did that make you feel? Mueller searches for the right word. Small, he says finally. Ellis nods, as if he has heard this before. Because he has. Similar interviews are being conducted across dozens of camps: Texas, Iowa, California, Wisconsin. Psychologists compile the responses. Patterns emerge quickly. The men are not angry, not resentful. They are recalibrating. In the barracks that night, Weber sits on his bunk, staring at the ceiling. They didn't show us those stores by accident, he says quietly. Muller does not disagree. The outings continue, always supervised, always calm. A hardware store filled with tools, a feed supply warehouse stacked floor to ceiling, a movie theater where newsreels play before the feature, factories rolling tanks off assembly lines, shipyards launching vessels faster than the announcer can finish his sentence. No one explains these trips. No one needs to. The prisoners begin to understand that the war they fought was not just lost on the battlefield, it was lost in production schedules, logistics tables, and supply chains they never saw. Ellis's reports move up the chain of command. The language is clinical. Exposure to civilian abundance accelerates acceptance of defeat. Material superiority undermines ideological resistance more effectively than coercion. POWs reassess enemy stereotypes when confronted with domestic stability. For the army, this is data. For Muller, it is a slow unraveling of certainty. He thinks of Germany's ration cards, the endless calculations. How many grams of bread? How many calories? How many people can be fed before the next delivery fails to arrive? Here, delivery never fails. Spring turns to summer. Letters arrive from home, carefully worded, heavily censored. Cities destroyed. Food shortages worsening. Air raids unrelenting. One evening, after lights out, Weber speaks again. If they have this much, he says, why are they even bothering to fight us? Muller answers without thinking. Because they can. It is the most terrifying realization yet. By late April 1945, news reaches the camp in fragments. Berlin encircled. Hitler dead. Units surrendering en masse. Guards confirm it without ceremony. The war is over. There is no celebration among the prisoners. No tears. Just a deep, quiet stillness. Muller walks the perimeter fence that evening, watching the sun set over fields untouched by trenches or craters. Beyond the wire, American life continues uninterrupted. Cars on distant roads, lights flickering on in farmhouses, radios playing music instead of air raid sirens. He knows now that Germany was never fighting America alone. It was fighting America's farms, America's factories, America's transportation networks, America's ability to feed itself endlessly while projecting power across oceans. And no amount of courage at the front could overcome that. The surrender comes without ceremony. On a warm afternoon in early May 1945, the camp loudspeakers crackle to life. An American officer reads a short announcement. Germany has capitulated. Hostilities have ceased. Prisoners are to remain in place until further instructions. No cheers rise from the barracks, no shouts of anger. The men stand quietly, absorbing words that would once have been unthinkable. Karl Müller feels neither relief nor grief, only weight, like something pressing down on his chest that has been there for years, now finally acknowledged. The days that follow are strange. Work details continue, but the guard's posture changes. Rifles are still carried, but slung more loosely. Conversations grow casual. Cigarettes are shared more freely. Someone brings a radio into the camp yard and American music drifts through the wire. Swing tunes, cheerful and confident. Muller sits on the steps of the barracks, watching clouds drift lazily overhead. For the first time in years, the future exists again. The psychological evaluations continue. Captain Ellis returns with his clipboard, now thicker, corners worn soft from use. He no longer pretends the interviews are incidental. We're interested in what you think happens next, he tells Muller. Muller considers the question carefully. Germany will have to learn, he says, not how to fight, how to supply. Ellis raises an eyebrow. Supply? Food, Muller explains. Fuel, work, the things that keep people from listening to dangerous ideas. Ellis writes this down slowly. Across the United States, similar interviews are producing similar conclusions. The men who once believed in inevitable victory now speak in terms of infrastructure, logistics, and capacity. Ideology has been replaced by arithmetic. Summer deepens. Fields around the camp are harvested. Prisoners work alongside American farmers under supervision, stacking hay, repairing fences, driving tractors larger than any Muller has seen. The machines are powerful, efficient, and plentiful. One farmer wipes his brow and gestures toward the horizon. Plenty more where that came from, he says casually. The phrase echoes something Muller heard before. Plenty more in the back. At night, the prisoners talk less about battles and more about rebuilding. Who was a mechanic? Who worked in a factory? Who might find employment once home? Survival has replaced victory as the central concern. Then, in late summer, the first repatriation lists are posted. Names appear on a board outside the command office. Groups are assigned dates, transport routes, ports of departure. Muller finds his name in the third column. He feels a strange pang, not of fear, but of reluctance. America has been a cage, yes, but also a revelation. Leaving it means returning to a Germany that exists now only in memory and rumour. On the morning of departure, he packs his issued duffel bag. Inside are American trousers, a shirt, soap, a towel, and a folded letter explaining his status as a released POW. Everything is labelled, documented, ordered. At the gate, Captain Ellis shakes his hand. "You'll do all right," Ellis says. It is not encouragement. It is assessment. Muller boards the transport truck and looks back once more at the camp, at the wire, the barracks, the flag fluttering lazily in the sun. Beyond it, America stretches on, unchanged by war at home. The ship that carries them east cuts steadily through calm seas. Below deck, men talk quietly. No one sings, no one boasts. They have seen something that cannot be unseen. October 9th, 1945, Bremerhaven, Germany. The ship's engines slow, and a dull vibration passes through the deck plates. Karl Muller grips the railing as the grey outline of the harbour emerges from the morning mist. What greets him is not a city, but a scar. Cranes stand twisted and idle, their steel arms bent like broken bones. Warehouses along the quay are gutted, roofs torn open to the sky. The air carries the smell of coal dust, wet brick, and rot. There is no music, no banners, only the cries of gulls circling over rubble. The gangway drops with a metallic clang. Muller steps onto German soil for the first time in 7 months. His boots scrape against cracked concrete. Around him, former prisoners move slowly, as if afraid that walking too quickly might shatter the fragile reality of being home. Faces line the edge of the dock. Wives, mothers, sisters, thin, pale, dressed in patched coats despite the mild weather. There is joy in their eyes, but also something harder. Calculation. Another mouth to feed. Another ration card to divide. As Muller walks inland, the contrast strikes him with physical force. Shops are empty shells. Windows boarded over or shattered entirely. Handwritten signs hang crookedly in doorways. No deliveries. Closed until further notice. Nothing left. Outside a distribution centre, a line of people stretches around the corner, each clutching ration cards like lifelines. He stops in front of a former grocery store. Inside, shelves stand bare except for a few jars spaced deliberately far apart, arranged to give the illusion of stock. The glass is dusty. The lights are dim. Unbidden, his mind fills the space with images from America. Bright aisles, humming refrigerators, towers of canned goods stacked without fear of running out. A child passes him, dragging a tin can on a string, pretending it is a truck. The sound echoes down the street, hollow and lonely. At home, his mother embraces him tightly, her arms thinner than he remembers. The kitchen smells of cabbage and watery broth. They sit at the table in silence for a long moment before she speaks. You were treated well? She asks carefully, eyes searching his face. Yes, Miller answers. Better than we were told. She nods, not surprised. That night, as they eat their thin soup, Muller finds himself studying the shelves in their kitchen, counting jars, calculating days. The habits of scarcity return automatically, but something inside him has changed. In the weeks that follow, Muller looks for work. Factories are damaged but restarting under Allied supervision. American trucks arrive with supplies flour, coal, machine parts. Everything arrives with paperwork. Everything is counted, logged, distributed. He recognizes the system immediately. Former POWs begin to find one another, drawn together by shared experience. They speak quietly, usually at night. They had food like this all through the war. They never hid it. Their civilians lived normally. These conversations do not praise America. They do something more dangerous. They correct the narrative. Muller realizes that what broke him in that supermarket was not envy. It was certainty. The certainty that Germany had been fighting an enemy whose strength did not depend on desperation or sacrifice at home. The war, he now understands, was lost long before the last shots were fired. It was lost when Germany chose conquest over supply, ideology over logistics. As winter approaches, Germany grows colder. Food grows scarcer. Yet Muller carries something with him that others do not. A memory of what stability looks like when it is engineered deliberately. He begins to think differently. About work, about systems, about rebuilding not through slogans, but through production. One evening, standing outside a small shop newly reopened with Allied goods, Muller watches as a crate is unloaded. Canned food, carefully stacked. The shelves inside are still modest, but they are full. Light spills onto the street. For the first time since the war ended, Muller allows himself to believe that Germany might one day look like what he saw behind American glass doors. Not in excess, but in certainty. February 1946. Cologne, British occupation zone. Snow clings to the edges of bomb craters like chalk dust, softening the ruin without hiding it. Karl Muller walks carefully along a street that no longer has proper sidewalks. Bricks crunch underfoot. Somewhere behind him, a tram bell rings. Improvised, irregular, but functioning. Functioning. That word has begun to matter more than any slogan ever did. Muller has found work at a partially restored warehouse near the Rhine, unloading aid shipments under Allied supervision. The job is hard and monotonous, but it is steady. Every crate is logged. Every pallet is counted. Nothing moves without a form. At first, this obsession with paperwork irritates the German workers. Then, they begin to understand it. Muller watches an American logistics officer explain a delivery schedule to a German foreman. There is no shouting, no ideological lecture, just numbers, timelines, capacity. You miss one step, the officer says calmly, tapping the clipboard, and the whole chain slows. The foreman nods. Muller feels an almost physical echo of the supermarket aisles in that moment. The same logic, applied at scale. During lunch breaks, conversations drift back to captivity. The camp, the farms, the towns, the stores. One man describes seeing a bakery in Iowa that discarded bread at the end of the day because it was cheaper to bake fresh than to store leftovers. Another recalls a hardware store where tools were stacked so high they needed ladders to reach them. At first, these stories sound like exaggeration. Then Muller speaks. He describes the refrigeration units, the ice, the produce sprayed with water to keep it fresh, the way civilians shopped without urgency, without fear of the shelves emptying tomorrow. The men fall silent. No one laughs. These memories do not fade. They harden. In Allied offices, analysts note an unexpected trend among returning POWs. Those who spent time in the United States show lower resistance to occupation policies. They adapt faster to new economic structures. They speak less about lost glory and more about rebuilding capacity. The conclusion is uncomfortable for some German officials. Exposure to functioning abundance reshaped expectations. Müller feels it in himself. He no longer measures success in terms of territory or honor. He measures it in outputs. Can a factory run continuously? Can food arrive on time? Can people eat without calculating grams? By 1947, Marshall Plan aid begins to arrive in earnest. New machinery, fuel, raw materials. Müller watches crates stamped with English words being unloaded, processed, distributed. It is not charity, it is investment. And Müller recognizes the pattern immediately. This is not the chaos of victory. This is the extension of the same system he saw in that supermarket, scaled up, organized, relentless. One evening, Müller stands outside a newly opened grocery in Cologne. The shelves are still sparse by American standards, but they are stocked. Canned goods sit in neat rows. Bread is available without barter. A small refrigerator hums softly in the corner, its motor steady and patient. A woman enters, glances around and selects what she needs. No hoarding, no panic. Just shopping. Müller steps aside and watches. He realizes then that the war did not end for him in May 1945. It ended the day he stood under fluorescent lights in an American supermarket and understood with devastating clarity that wars are won long before soldiers meet. Won by those who can sustain normal life while projecting extraordinary force. That memory does not accuse, it instructs, and it will shape the world that follows. Autumn 1948. Cologne. The city no longer smells only of ruin. Coal smoke still hangs in the air, yes, but now it mixes with something else. Fresh bread, machine oil, soap. The sounds have changed too. Hammers strike steel. Engines turn over. Trams run on schedules again. Their bells ringing with renewed confidence. Karl Müller stands in line outside a grocery shop on Venloer Strasse. It is early morning, but there is no panic. People chat quietly. A woman adjusts her scarf. A man folds a newspaper under his arm. When the doors open, the line moves forward smoothly, without pushing. Inside, the shelves are not overflowing, but they are reliable. Canned vegetables, flour, coffee, soap. Each item sits where it belongs. Each delivery arrives when promised. Müller notices a small refrigeration unit behind the counter, humming softly. It is modest, but it works. That sound still means something to him. He thinks back to America. Not often now, but precisely. The memory has sharpened with time, stripped of emotion and left with structure. He remembers the spacing of aisles, the standardized labels, the way supply was invisible because it never failed. That, he realizes, was the real shock. Not abundance, but predictability. Across West Germany, economists and planners are quietly rewriting the rules. Currency reform replaces worthless Reichsmarks with the Deutsche Mark. Ration cards begin to disappear. Production targets replace ideological speeches. Müller hears unfamiliar terms more often now. Output, efficiency, distribution networks. He understands them instinctively. At work, Müller is promoted to a supervisory role. He keeps meticulous records, tracks deliveries, insists on redundancy. Some co-workers grumble at first. Why so careful? One asks. We finally have supplies. Müller answers simply, so we keep them. Unbeknownst to him, similar attitudes are emerging across the country. Former POWs, especially those who spent time in the United States, gravitate toward logistics, manufacturing, transportation. They have seen what happens when systems are allowed to fail. They have also seen what happens when they don't. Historians will later note this quietly. That exposure to American civilian life did more than demoralize German soldiers. It reprogrammed assumptions. It replaced heroic myths with industrial realities. Müller never speaks publicly about the supermarket. He doesn't need to. The lesson expresses itself through action. In 1950, he marries. They move into a small apartment with electricity that stays on all night. A refrigerator hums in the kitchen, small but reliable. His wife places groceries inside without thinking twice. Muller pauses in the doorway and listens. That sound, steady, indifferent to fear, still feels like a promise. Years later, he will explain it to his son, who asks what the war was like. Muller does not describe battles. He does not describe explosions. He describes shelves. How full they were, he says, and how calm everyone seemed. His son does not fully understand. But Muller knows that someday he will. Because the greatest weapon he ever encountered was not a tank or a bomber. It was a system that never let ordinary life collapse. And once you have seen that, the world can never be understood the same way again. Pentagon, Washington, D.C. Winter, 1949. The room smells faintly of paper, ink, and cigarette smoke. Fluorescent lights buzz overhead as folders are stacked neatly across a long oak table. The covers are stamped in block letters. Prisoner of War. Psychological Assessments. European Theatre, 1944-1946. A colonel in rolled-up sleeves flips through the pages, his finger tracing underlined passages. Across from him, a civilian analyst adjusts his glasses and clears his throat. It wasn't the camps, the analyst says. Not primarily. The colonel looks up. Then what was it? The analyst taps the paper. Exposure. He reads aloud from one of the reports. Subjects displayed rapid ideological disengagement after controlled exposure to civilian economic abundance. Reactions included disbelief, recalibration of enemy image, and long-term reassessment of national capacity. Another report notes something more specific. Supervised visits to civilian marketplaces had a disproportionately strong impact compared to traditional re-education efforts. The colonel exhales slowly. So grocery stores did what leaflets and lectures couldn't. Essentially, the analyst replies, because they didn't argue, they demonstrated. The Americans had not planned this as psychological warfare, not at first. The supervised outings were the logistical conveniences, morale experiments, Geneva-compliant labor arrangements. But once the pattern emerged, it was measured, documented, understood. German POWs did not leave those stores angry. They left quiet. And quiet, the reports noted, was dangerous to ideology. Back in Cologne, Karl Müller feels this shift without knowing its origin. He simply senses that the arguments of the past no longer persuade anyone. When political extremists speak in beer halls about betrayal or destiny, fewer listen. The language sounds hollow now, unanchored from material reality. People have learned a new metric. Can you deliver food? Can you keep lights on? Can you make tomorrow predictable? Those who cannot answer these questions lose credibility. Müller watches this play out in small moments. A neighbor dismisses a fiery speech with a shrug. Nice words, he says, but where are the deliveries? The lesson spreads without slogans. In 1952, Müller travels briefly for work to Hamburg. At the port, he watches cargo unloaded with clockwork precision. Containers stacked, manifests checked, trucks dispatched on schedule. For a moment, standing amid the cranes and diesel fumes, he is back in that supermarket, rows aligned, flow uninterrupted. He realizes something then that even the Americans may not have fully grasped. They did not win German minds by humiliating them. They won them by showing what worked. Years later, Müller will read a newspaper article about the Cold War, about competing systems, about ideological struggle between East and West. He reads it carefully, then folds the paper and sets it aside. He already knows the answer. The system that can feed people consistently will win. Eventually. Because hunger erodes belief faster than bullets ever could. One evening, he walks past a shop window and stops. Inside, shelves are nearly full now. Not American full, but enough. Enough that no one panics. Enough that life proceeds. Müller smiles faintly. He remembers the shock on Weber's face, the sound of ice in a paper cup, the offhand remark from a guard, plenty more in the back. Those words had travelled farther than any tank. They crossed oceans, outlived flags, reshaped expectations, and in the end, they helped build a different Germany. Not through force, but through certainty. Spring 1954, Cologne. The rain falls steadily, tapping against glass storefronts and newly repaired tram stops. Karl Muller walks home from work beneath an umbrella, briefcase in hand. The streets are busy now, not frantic, not desperate, but purposeful. People move with places to be, jobs to do, expectations rooted in routine rather than survival. At the corner grocer, a delivery truck idles. Two men unload crates with practiced efficiency. The driver checks a clipboard, nods, and lights a cigarette. No one rushes him. No one worries the shelves will be empty tomorrow. Müller pauses, watching. He has not thought about the war in weeks, not consciously. That is new. For years it lingered like a shadow behind every moment. Now it surfaces only when something triggers it. Like this. The crates are stacked inside. Canned goods, dry goods, fresh produce, wrapped carefully in paper. Nothing extravagant, but nothing scarce either. That balance still feels miraculous. Inside the shop, a woman complains mildly that the apples are smaller than last week's. Müller almost laughs. 10 years ago, apples themselves would have been unimaginable. He steps aside to let others pass, listening to the low hum of the refrigerator behind the counter. The sound is steady, reliable, no sputter, no flicker. That hum carries him backward through time, back to bright fluorescent lights, back to endless aisles, back to the day the war ended in his mind, though no one announced it. He remembers Weber, who never quite adjusted after returning. Weber talked often about America, but not with admiration, with confusion. How can people live like that, he would ask, and still want more? Weber moved east in 1949. Müller never saw him again. The divide between East and West becomes clearer with each passing year. Müller sees it not in speeches, but in supply, in what arrives on time, in what doesn't. Occasionally, Müller is asked to speak to younger workers about the war. He avoids drama, avoids heroics. When pressed, he tells one story: the supermarket. He describes it plainly. No embellishment, no emotion, just facts. How much food? Someone always asks. All of it, Müller answers. More than you could carry, more than you could imagine running out. The room usually goes quiet, because the implication is unavoidable. Wars are not only contests of courage, they are contests of continuity. That lesson, Müller knows, was absorbed by thousands of men like him. Quietly, permanently. It shaped choices, careers, beliefs, not through force, but through comparison. In America, those old reports sit in archives now, yellowing slowly. Few people read them. Fewer still understand how significant they were, but their conclusions live on. That exposure to a functioning society, unbroken, unafraid, can dismantle myths faster than any argument. That abundance, when real, does not need to be defended. One evening, Müller stands on his apartment balcony as the city lights flicker on across Cologne. Windows glow warmly. Radios play music. Somewhere, a family sits down to dinner without counting calories. He breathes in deeply. This quiet normalcy, is what the war was really about. Not flags, not speeches, but whether ordinary life could endure. He thinks again of that first American guard, standing casually near the supermarket doors, rifle slung. No urgency in his posture, as if guarding prisoners was a minor inconvenience in a world already secure. Müller had mistaken that confidence for arrogance. Now he understands it was logistics. And logistics, once seen clearly, cannot be unseen. Summer 1961. Cologne. The radio sits on the kitchen counter, its wooden casing warm from the afternoon sun. Carl Müller turns the dial slowly, the static crackling between stations, until a familiar voice breaks through. The announcer's tone is tense. Construction has begun overnight in Berlin. Barbed wire barriers are being erected. Movement between sectors is being restricted. Müller stops turning the dial. He stands still, listening as the report continues. Concrete, guards, orders, a line being drawn through a city that once symbolized unity. The wall. He switches the radio off and sits at the table. Outside, life continues as usual. A delivery truck rattles past. A neighbor laughs. Somewhere nearby, a refrigerator hums. The contrast is impossible to ignore. Over the years, Müller has learned to recognize the early signs of fracture. It always begins the same way. Restrictions, shortages, explanations that sound ideological but feel logistical. Promises made to cover gaps that cannot be filled. He remembers Weber again, the way he had spoken of America with disbelief rather than admiration. Weber had chosen the East because it promised certainty through control. But Müller had seen what real certainty looked like. It looked like shelves that stayed full without orders, like systems that worked without fear, like civilians who shopped without calculating survival. That memory has guided him ever since. At work, Müller now oversees regional distribution for a growing manufacturing firm. He spends his days coordinating shipments, optimizing routes, building redundancies. His colleagues joke that he plans as if disaster is always around the corner. Müller does not correct them. Disaster, he knows, begins when systems grow fragile. He teaches younger employees to think the same way. Not about profit first, but flow. Where does material come from? Where does it go? What happens if one link breaks? People don't panic because of bad news, he tells them. They panic because delivery stops. No one argues. That afternoon, his son returns home from school, excited and confused by what he has heard on the news. Why would they build a wall? He asks. Doesn't that make things worse? Müller considers how to answer. Walls are built when systems fail, he says finally, or when people are afraid they will. His son frowns, not fully understanding, but sensing the weight behind the words. That evening, Müller walks past a supermarket on his way home. The windows are wide and bright now, modeled deliberately on American designs. Automatic doors slide open, shoppers drift in and out, unhurried. Inside, the aisles are not endless, but they are orderly, predictable, reliable. He steps in briefly, not to buy anything, but to observe. Old habit. The layout is familiar, the logic unmistakable. This is the real inheritance of the war, he thinks. Not destruction, but understanding. Across decades, across borders, the lesson continues to echo. Nations rise not because they shout the loudest, but because they feed their people quietly, consistently, and without drama. Müller leaves the store and walks home as dusk settles over the city. Streetlights flicker on. Trams glide past on schedule. Somewhere, radios carry news of confrontation and ideology. But beneath it all, life continues. And Müller knows, deep in his bones, that the side which can keep supermarkets lit, trucks moving and shelves stocked, will always outlast the side that cannot. It was true in 1945. It is true now. And it will remain true long after those aisles, those camps, and those men have passed into history.